Four children and two adults killed in a mass knife attack in Barrhaven. Teenagers slain in an attack that killed four kids and a woman had called out for help before she was murdered. A fire displaces about 100 people in Coquitlam. Scientists in Winnipeg shipped Ebola to the Wuhan lab at the center of the COVID lab leak theory. And 280 school children have been kidnapped in Nigeria. Good morning. It's Friday, March 8th. Happy International Women's Day to you all. I'm Nora, and here are your headlines. First, we start in Ottawa with a tragic mass killing that left four children, their mother, and another man dead. The father survived and is in stable condition. It happened in Barrhaven, which is a suburb of Ottawa, late on Wednesday night. The victims were Darshani Dilantika Ikenayake, who was 35 years old, and her four children, 7-year-old Inuka, 4-year-old Ashwini, 2-year-old Rinyana, and the infant, just 2 months old, Kelly. Amarakun Mubia Yansela Gigamini Amarakun, who was 40, was also killed. The killer is 19-year-old Fibrio Dizoisa. He is from Sri Lanka and has been in Canada to study at Algonquin College, though officials at Algonquin College said that he hasn't been in classes since last year. He lived with the family, and he lived with the other man who was killed. Condolences poured out from politicians and the Ottawa Catholic School Board, where the eldest child was a student. Police gave no motive for the tragedy. Now, this has happened just weeks after another mass family murder, one that happened in Carman, Manitoba. You'll remember that I mentioned on the Daily News. CBC's Karen Pauls is reporting that not long before she was murdered by the partner of her aunt, 17-year-old Maya Grattan told her friends that she feared for her life. Life with Ryan Menowak-Kisik was volatile. He would become intoxicated and irrational and violent. He constantly threatened to kill his family, Grattan says in a voice recording that her friends had kept. Grattan tried to get removed from the home, but her social worker wouldn't move her. Her mother and stepfather, who are no longer together, are devastated by her loss, of course, and told CBC the many ways that she was failed by the system. Police had even been called to the house before, and still there was no child service intervention to get Grattan out or to help the other children. Next to Coquitlam, where a fire has forced a mass evacuation at an apartment building, leaving about 100 people without a place to live for now. The damage is such that it's not clear when people will be able to go home. CTV's Michelle Brunoro and Ian Holliday report that residents who were used to false alarms in the building realized quickly that this time they had to leave. One resident, Zain Hashimi, was running door to door trying to get people out, and he said that the smoke was brutal. The fire was at the 100 block of Gattonsbury Street. Next, to news that I'm going to grab from the Daily Mail in the UK, which, as you probably know, is also known as the Daily Fail. Not in the same way that we call the Globe and Mail the Globe and Fail sometimes, but more like how we call the Globe and Mail the Old and Stale sometimes. But this news isn't really being reported much in Canada, and the Daily Fail has a report that's succinct, and so here we go. You might have heard some of the story before. A Chinese couple is under the spotlight after an investigation from CSIS has confirmed that they breached various safety protocols while working in the Canadian National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. Now, this lab does important work. You'll recall the role that it played in finding a vaccine against Ebola, for example. Well, it seems that actually this couple sent Ebola to China. That's just one of the many things that we know about them. Dr. Chiang Guo Chu and Dr. Keding Cheng were seen as star researchers, especially Chu, for developing an antibody treatment against Ebola. But in 2019, the pair was escorted out of the lab and then stripped of their roles in 2021. There was not much information at the time as to why, what happened, what did they do, and why were they being stripped of their roles. The CSIS documents though, allege that Chu, quote, intentionally transferred scientific knowledge and materials to China in order to benefit the PRC government and herself without regard for the implications to Canada's interests, unquote. And so where did she send this Ebola virus? She sent it to the Wuhan Infectious Diseases Lab. Ebola and also 30 vials of the Henipavirus there too. This is another very deadly virus. There are other allegations as well that she brought restricted visitors into her lab, including a Chinese civil servant and a research assistant at the Academy of Military Sciences in Beijing. Chu has been named on an Ebola patent in China in 2018, and that is what set off alarm bells because she didn't mention that she was going to be named on a patent to the Winnipeg lab. If you want to hear more about this, you should definitely listen to the CBC Front Burner episode about it from yesterday. It's very good and thorough. Now, as someone who lives with a scientist who's dealing with pretty high-level research, I can imagine that some of these lapses in security might be innocent enough. Scientists do send things to one another all the time through the mail, and one of the lapses is that she sent mice protein out of the lab, though the mice protein was in a container that was labeled as kitchen utensils, which is definitely weird. The story, though, suffers from scientific illiteracy. Not necessarily just the one in the Daily Mail, but I mean in general. It isn't automatically a threat to Canadian security to have Canadian scientists collaborating with China, even if those scientists are Chinese themselves, and certainly not on vaccines. Collaboration in this world should be seen as a good thing. But because of a widespread lack of scientific literacy, this issue has been driven by partisan politicians who want to score political points with something that is very highly technical. The couple lives back in China already, and so the questions about what is and what isn't acceptable for international collaborations is one that we probably should hash out publicly. And who decides what is and isn't acceptable? Is it politicians or is it scientists? If the couple has already left Canada, then the real things that we have to decide are these protocols and what happens when someone breaches these protocols. And for me, I'm very, very, very skeptical when these protocols are being overseen by a group like CSIS rather than scientists themselves. But anyway, this is the kind of story where we need to hear from scientists doing sensitive research, talk about what is more or less benign and what is a massive red flag. And of course, the fact that it's taken so long to get any information out, that's probably the biggest problem. It certainly does seem like the allegations that the Conservatives have been making for years, that the Liberals have been hiding information, have been true. And to have the Wuhan lab be part of the story doesn't help quell any conspiracies either. That, of course, is the location of what people call the lab leak conspiracy theory for the origins of COVID. I'm not going to get into the lab leak conspiracy other than to say it hasn't been proven. There's no evidence that it's true. A lot of people believe it, and it's interesting. You should definitely Google it if you've got 5 hours to just waste. Anyway, we need to learn more about this story, and it is wild to me that the only places that I saw anything about it when looking for a source that wasn't the Daily Mail was CBC and the reporting done by Karen Pauls, who has broken this and followed it from the start. The only other thing I saw was a brief mention in a Globe and Mail morning email. And finally, more than 280 students have been abducted in Kuriga, Nigeria. The students were at the schoolyard at the start of the day when dozens of people rolled into the schoolyard with guns on motorcycles. The students were between the ages of 8 and 15, and a teacher was also kidnapped. Kuriga is in Nigeria's northwest, and hundreds of people have been kidnapped in similar ways, though kidnapping children had been something that had been slowing until this week. The kidnapping happened in an area controlled by a group called Ansaru, which was a faction that broke away from Boko Haram. Kidnapping people and forcing their family to pay a ransom is a lucrative way to make money in Nigeria. Even though a law was passed in 2022 that punishes kidnapping with the aim of getting a ransom by 15 years in prison, no one has actually been charged under this new law. Now, of the students, 187 of them were from the government secondary school, 125 of them were from the primary school, and 25 had already returned, reports BBC. Now, just days before, dozens of women and children were collecting firewood in the northeastern part of Nigeria, and they also were captured by militants, that time, though, by Boko Haram. The BBC says that these two incidents, though sounding similar, are not related. Those are your headlines for Friday, March 8th, this International Women's Day, or International Working Women's Day, whatever you want to call it. I'm Nora. I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead of you. I am getting at the end of my week of relaxation on my own for this March break. I sent my family away, and it's been awesome. It's been great. You're listening to this podcast at sandynora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. I will talk to you on the other side.